She thought she married the man of her dreams, until his love felt like a cage. Layla wasn't looking for a fairy tale, but that's exactly what Khalid promised. Charming, wealthy, and dangerously persuasive, he swept her off her feet with words that felt like poetry and promises that seemed too perfect to question. "You don't need anyone else, Layla. I'll give you everything." And he did. Lavish gifts, luxury trips, a life most people could only dream of. But behind the diamonds and designer dresses was something invisible, yet suffocating: control. What felt like love was really ownership. What seemed like protection was just isolation. And by the time she realized it, she was already trapped. Control doesn't always come with chains. Sometimes it comes dressed as love. At first, Khalid's words sounded sweet, wrapped in concern, dipped in charm. "I just want what's best for you, Layla. You look beautiful, but maybe something less revealing would be better. Do you really think your friends care about you the way I do?" It wasn't a demand. Not yet. It was a suggestion, one that grew louder with every passing day. Layla didn't notice the shift at first. It was subtle, like a slow drip of water wearing down stone. A comment here, a disapproving glance there. He began curating her life with invisible strings, pulling her closer until she couldn't tell where she ended and where his control began. Her wardrobe changed, not because she wanted it to, but because Khalid's compliments disappeared when she dressed the way she liked. "That dress? It's too loud. You're better than that." So she started choosing clothes that wouldn't spark his criticism. Phone calls with friends grew shorter. "They're a bad influence. They don't understand us." So she stopped answering. Her laughter faded. Her world shrank. Not with a slam of a door, but with a whisper of doubt. When she questioned him, his words turned sharp, wrapped in guilt. "I do everything for you, and this is how you repay me. You're lucky to have someone who cares this much." And Layla began to wonder, was he right? Maybe she was overthinking. Maybe love really did mean sacrifice. Maybe she was the problem. But deep down, beneath the layers of doubt he'd planted, a voice whispered, "This isn't love. This is control." She just wasn't ready to hear it yet, but she would. And when she did, Khalid's mask would finally slip, revealing the monster beneath the man. The loudest screams are often the ones no one hears. Layla's world grew quieter with each passing day, not the peaceful kind, but the suffocating silence that settles when everything familiar is stripped away. Conversations with friends faded. Family calls went unanswered. Not because she didn't try, but because Khalid always had a reason, always a way to pull her back into his orbit. "They don't understand our life, Layla. Why do you need them when you have me? They're just jealous of what we have." At first she believed him, but belief has an expiration date. She sat in rooms filled with luxury. Crystal chandeliers, velvet cushions, golden frames. But it felt like the walls were closing in, inch by inch. The mansion wasn't her home. It was her cage. A beautiful prison wrapped in silk and silence. Khalid's absence echoed louder than his presence. When he was home, his words were sharp, his affection conditional. When he was gone, the emptiness was deafening. She realized she wasn't missing him. She was missing herself. The woman who once laughed freely now stared at her reflection, wondering where that spark had gone. When did she become afraid to speak her mind? When did she start apologizing for simply existing? One evening, she found an old photo, her and her best friend, smiling, carefree, alive. A different version of herself, a version Khalid had slowly erased, and that's when it hit her. Khalid didn't love her, he owned her. Not her heart, but her freedom, her voice, her identity. The realization was like a scream inside her chest, silent to the world but deafening to her soul. She was trapped, but not for long, because once you hear that silent scream, you either let it break you or you let it set you free. Sometimes it takes one moment of humiliation to ignite a lifetime of defiance. The grand hall was filled with people, Khalid's people. Influential faces dressed in elegance, glasses clinking, polite laughter floating under crystal chandeliers. Layla stood beside him, her smile fragile, like glass threatening to shatter. She had perfected this mask, the obedient wife, the silent beauty, the woman who knew her place. But that night, the mask cracked. It started with a simple comment. "Layla, why don't you keep quiet? This isn't a topic for you." Laughter followed, not hers, but the room's. And Khalid smiled, not at her, but at her humiliation. Her heart didn't just sink, it burned. She felt the heat rise in her chest, not from embarrassment, but from something she hadn't felt in a long time: anger. It wasn't just the words. It was the years hidden behind them, the isolation, the gaslighting, the slow erosion of her identity, masked as love. For a second she locked eyes with Khalid. His gaze was sharp, daring her to react, knowing she wouldn't, because she never had. But something was different this time. Something inside her snapped, not loud, not visible, but real. The first flicker of defiance. A spark. She didn't say anything, not yet. But as she stood there, silent amidst the laughter, her mind screamed. How did I get here? When did I become this small, this invisible? The reflection hit her harder than Khalid's words. She had disappeared, not all at once, but piece by piece. Each compromise, each apology for things that weren't her fault. Each time she stayed silent to keep the peace. But that night, she didn't feel small. She felt something rising. Not rage, not grief, rebellion. Because humiliation is only powerful when you allow it to define you. And Layla was done being defined by Khalid's words. This wasn't her breaking point, it was her turning point. The most dangerous rebellion is the one no one sees coming. After that night, something inside Layla shifted. She still played the role. The obedient wife with the perfect smile, the woman who nodded at Khalid's words and laughed at jokes that weren't funny. But beneath that practice mask, a storm was brewing. Khalid didn't notice. Why would he? He believed he had broken her, shaped her into the silent shadow he needed, a trophy, not a person. But what he didn't realize was that Layla was learning, not how to survive him, but how to defeat him. Late at night, when the mansion was silent and Khalid's arrogance rested beside her, Layla would quietly slip out of bed. Hidden in the corners of her luxurious prison, she opened her laptop, her forbidden weapon. She began to research, her fingers trembling not with fear, but with determination. Legal rights for women. How to document emotional abuse. Steps to escape controlling relationships. The words on the screen felt like oxygen in a room she'd been suffocating in for years. She learned about laws Khalid thought she'd never know, protections he never imagined she'd seek. Every page she read was like stitching together the pieces of herself he'd tried to tear apart. She started documenting everything, every insult, every restriction, every financial control. Hidden journals, secret voice recordings, photos saved under innocent file names. She was building her case, one detail at a time. But knowledge wasn't enough. She needed hope, and hope found her when she least expected it. One afternoon, while Khalid was away, she visited a quiet cafe under the pretense of getting fresh air. That's where she saw her, Amina, an old friend she hadn't spoken to in years. Amina's face lit up, but Layla's heart raced with both fear and relief. "Layla, is that really you?" They talked cautiously, Layla's words careful, her eyes scanning for anyone Khalid might have sent to follow her. But Amina saw through the facade. "You're not okay, are you?" Layla didn't respond with words. She didn't need to. Her silence said enough. Amina squeezed her hand gently, leaning in with a whisper that shattered Layla's fear. "You're not trapped. You just think you are." Those words echoed in Layla's mind long after they parted. She wasn't trapped. She was just conditioned to believe she was. That day, Layla realized something powerful. Khalid didn't own her. He never did. And soon, he'd learn that too. When control starts to slip, abusers tighten their grip. But the tighter the grip, the more things break. Khalid sensed the shift, even if he couldn't explain it. Layla's silence wasn't the same anymore. It wasn't submission, it was distance, a distance that scared him more than he'd ever admit. He didn't know what was changing, but he felt it. And men like Khalid don't confront fear, they control it. The first weapon? Money. He began by limiting her access to finances, not in obvious ways, but quietly, strategically. Why do you need your own account? I handle everything for us. You don't need cash, Layla, just tell me what you want. At first it sounded like care, but it wasn't, it was a leash. Layla's credit card stopped working without warning. Her personal savings mysteriously transferred into joint accounts, accounts she couldn't access without his approval. The independence she once had vanished overnight, buried under Khalid's signature. But Khalid didn't stop at money. Control wasn't enough. He needed fear. Emotional blackmail became his favorite tool. Do you think anyone will believe you if you leave me? Without me, you're nothing, just a woman with a broken reputation. I made you. I can destroy you. His words were sharp, designed to cut deeper than any physical wound. He painted a world where Layla was invisible without him, a woman whose name would be dragged through dirt if she ever dared to stand against him. He wanted her to believe she was powerless. But here's the thing about fear. It only works if you let it, and Layla was done letting it. Every time he tightened his grip, she found another crack in the walls he'd built around her. Every insult was fuel. Every threat, a reminder of why she had to escape. Khalid thought he was breaking her, but all he was doing was sharpening the edges of a woman who was no longer afraid to fight. And soon he'd realize, fear wasn't her prison. It was her weapon. Isolation isn't just about being alone. It's about being surrounded by silence that screams louder than words. Khalid's control tightened like a noose. This was his final move, complete isolation. Not just from friends and family, but from the world itself. Layla's phone mysteriously stopped working. Her social media accounts were suddenly deactivated, emails left unsent, and every attempt to reach out was met with locked doors and dead ends. You don't need anyone else, Khalid would say, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I'm all you'll ever need. The house became her prison. Not the kind with bars, but with invisible walls made of fear and manipulation. Security guards she once thought were for protection now watched her every move. Even the staff avoided her gaze, trained to obey Khalid's silent orders. The silence was suffocating. Days blurred into nights, marked only by the echoes of her own thoughts. She stared out of windows that overlooked beautiful gardens, gardens she wasn't allowed to walk in without permission. She felt like a bird in a gilded cage, decorated, displayed, but never free. The mental strain grew heavier. She battled insomnia, her mind racing with memories of who she used to be. There were days when getting out of bed felt like climbing a mountain. Is this my life now? Was I ever really free? But here's the thing about Layla, her spirit wasn't something Khalid could lock away. In the depths of her isolation, she found something unexpected. Herself. She remembered the girl who had dreams bigger than her fears, the woman who once believed in her own strength. The darkness didn't break her, it became her teacher. It showed her what survival truly meant. She started writing, hidden journals filled with her story, her truth. If no one hears me now, they will someday. Khalid thought he'd won. But what he didn't understand was that you can cage a body, but you can't cage a soul. And Layla's soul was preparing for a fight he never saw coming. The truth doesn't just set you free, it gives you the power to burn down the walls that trapped you. One evening, Khalid left in a hurry, another business deal, another late-night meeting cloaked in secrecy. But this time, he forgot something. His office door slightly ajar. For weeks, Layla had been drowning in isolation, her mind spinning with fear and fury. But in that small crack of an open door, she saw something else, an opportunity. Her heart raced as she slipped inside. The office was a reflection of Khalid, polished, controlled, with every detail meticulously arranged. But beneath the surface of perfection, there was always a mess. She started searching, her hands trembling not with fear, but with adrenaline. Then she found it, a locked drawer, and beside it, a key. Inside were folders, neatly labeled with names she didn't recognize. Contracts, financial statements, foreign accounts, documents Khalid never meant for anyone to see, especially her. She read through them, her eyes widening with every page. Money laundering, fraud, offshore accounts tied to illegal activities. The same man who controlled every detail of her life had his own world of secrets, and it was uglier than she'd ever imagined. But this wasn't just about betrayal anymore. This was leverage. For the first time, Layla didn't feel trapped. She felt powerful. "You thought I was the fragile one, Khalid, but you're the one with everything to lose." She carefully documented everything, taking photos, copying files, building a case, piece by piece. Her silence had been her cage, but now it was her strategy. While Khalid believed he still controlled her, Layla was preparing to control something far greater, his downfall. She wasn't just planning an escape. She was planning revenge. And this time, she wasn't afraid. Survival was never the goal. Victory was. Armed with evidence of Khalid's darkest secrets, Layla wasn't just a woman seeking freedom anymore. She was a woman on a mission. But even the strongest warriors need allies. In the shadows of her isolation, she found a way to reach out. A hidden phone she'd secretly purchased, tucked away in the lining of an old purse Khalid never noticed. Her fingers trembled as she dialed a number she had memorized for weeks, a hotline for women's rights support. The voice on the other end wasn't just kind, it was powerful. "We hear you, Layla, and we're going to help you." She met Samira, a fierce, unapologetic women's rights lawyer known for taking down men who thought they were untouchable. Their meetings were covert, hidden under the guise of charity events Khalid never questioned. But behind closed doors, they strategized. Every detail of Khalid's abuse, every document, every recording compiled into a case strong enough to shatter the empire he built. As Layla worked with Samira, something inside her changed. She wasn't just a survivor recounting her pain. She was a woman reclaiming her power. She started to feel it in the way she walked, head higher, shoulders squared. She heard it in her voice, no longer trembling but steady and sharp. The tears that once fell in silence dried up, replaced by a quiet, burning determination. Khalid still saw the same woman, obedient, fragile, broken. But that's the thing about abusers. They never notice when the woman they tried to break is rebuilding herself in silence. Layla wasn't waiting for someone to save her anymore. She was her own rescue. And when the time came, Khalid wouldn't just face a wife he thought he owned. He'd face a force he never saw coming. She wasn't just fighting for her freedom. She was fighting to prove she was never his property to begin with. The day had come. Layla filed the case, her name inked on legal documents that would shatter Khalid's illusion of control. The news spread fast, faster than Khalid could contain it. A woman standing against not just her abusive husband, but an empire built on power, wealth, and fear. When Khalid received the summons, his arrogance cracked. "She wouldn't dare," he scoffed, dismissing it as a phase. But behind his cold facade, panic brewed, because Layla dared. The courtroom was nothing like the lavish halls Khalid was used to commanding. Here, his money couldn't silence the truth. He walked in with an army of high-priced lawyers, dressed in tailored suits, armed with carefully crafted lies. But Layla walked in with something stronger, her story. Tension gripped the room. Khalid's lawyers painted her as the ungrateful wife, twisting her words, gaslighting her even in front of the judge. "She's emotionally unstable. She's doing this for attention, for money." But Layla stood firm. No trembling hands, no wavering voice. She looked Khalid in the eyes, not with fear, but with defiance. "You can't control me here." She presented the evidence, documents exposing his financial crimes, recordings of his threats, detailed journals of years of psychological abuse. Each piece of proof was like a dagger, tearing through Khalid's carefully constructed mask. For every lie his lawyers told, Layla answered with the undeniable truth. The judge watched. The courtroom listened. And Khalid? He realized too late that his money couldn't buy back the power he lost. This wasn't just a legal battle. It was a war for her identity. And Layla wasn't fighting to survive anymore. She was fighting to win. The most powerful weapon she had was her voice, and this time the whole world was listening. The courtroom was silent, heavy with anticipation as Layla took the stand. The woman who once shrank in the shadows of Khalid's presence now sat tall, her back straight, eyes unwavering. This was her moment, not just to fight for justice, but to reclaim every piece of herself he tried to break. The prosecutor asked the first question. "Can you tell us what happened?" Layla took a deep breath, her hands steady, her voice clear. "It didn't start with violence. It started with love, or at least what I thought was love." She spoke of the subtle controls, the isolation disguised as protection, the emotional manipulation wrapped in sweet words, the fear that grew quietly, like a shadow she couldn't escape. Every word was raw, unfiltered, each sentence a wound laid bare for the world to see. She didn't cry. Not because she wasn't hurt, but because she'd cried enough in the dark. Now she was standing in the light. Khalid sat across the room, his face a mask of indifference, but his clenched fists and shifting eyes betrayed him. For the first time, he couldn't interrupt, couldn't twist her words, couldn't silence her. Then came the evidence. Layla presented the documents, bank statements, financial frauds, illegal transactions hidden behind shell companies. She played recordings of Khalid's threats, his voice dripping with the arrogance of a man who never thought he'd be exposed. "No one will believe you. You're nothing without me." But here she was, and everyone believed her. Photos of bruises, hidden journals detailing every incident, timelines that matched Khalid's business trips with patterns of abuse. The truth unfolded like a puzzle Khalid never thought she could solve. The courtroom wasn't just a place of judgment that day. It became Layla's battlefield. And with every word, every piece of evidence, she wasn't just dismantling Khalid's empire. She was rebuilding herself, brick by brick, word by word, turning her private pain into public power. Justice isn't just a verdict. It's the echo of truth finally heard. The courtroom was thick with silence as the judge reviewed the final documents, his gavel resting heavily beside him. Layla stood quietly, her heart pounding, not with fear, but with anticipation. This wasn't just about winning a case. This was about reclaiming her life. Khalid sat across from her, his once arrogant posture now tense. The man who had built an empire on control and manipulation was now powerless, his mask of confidence cracking with every second that passed. The judge's voice finally broke the silence. After reviewing all evidence, testimonies, and legal arguments, the court rules in favor of Layla. The words hit harder than any scream. Not because they were loud, but because they were final. She had won. The ruling granted Layla her freedom, legally, financially, emotionally. Khalid was ordered to pay damages for the years of abuse, his assets frozen pending further investigations into his crimes. But the money didn't matter. The real victory was never about wealth, it was about her dignity. As Layla stood to leave, she didn't look at Khalid, because he was no longer worth seeing. But Khalid couldn't escape what he saw. Cameras, reporters, headlines. Millionaire exposed in abuse scandal. Legal victory for survivor. Layla shatters powerful empire. His reputation crumbled faster than his fortune. Business partners severed ties. Sponsors withdrew support. The empire he built on lies collapsed under the weight of the truth, and Layla, she didn't just walk out of the courtroom, she walked into the rest of her life, free, fearless, and undefeated. Power built on fear crumbles when fear is no longer enough. Khalid's fall wasn't sudden. It was slow, humiliating, and public. What started as whispers in exclusive circles quickly exploded into headlines plastered across newspapers, social media feeds, and television screens. Billionaire Khalid exposed, abuser behind closed doors. Empire of lies, the truth about Khalid's corruption and control. His once loyal business partners distanced themselves overnight, issuing cold statements of shock and disappointment. Deals collapsed. His fortune, once limitless, was drained by legal fees, lawsuits, and frozen assets. But the real loss wasn't financial. It was his identity. The man who thrived on power was left with none. Criminal investigations followed. Authorities dug deeper, uncovering layers of fraud, money laundering, and abuse Khalid thought would stay buried. His connections, his influence, it all faded under the harsh light of public scrutiny. There was nowhere left to hide, and as the world watched his empire crumble, Khalid watched her. Layla. She was everywhere, on talk shows, in interviews, standing tall not as a victim, but as a voice for countless others silenced by men like him. Her face was no longer framed by fear, but by strength. She wasn't surviving. She was thriving. Khalid sat alone in the shadow of his ruined empire, haunted by the woman he tried to break, a woman who didn't just escape him, but defeated him. And the worst part, she never even looked back, because Layla's life was no longer defined by what she left behind. It was defined by everything she built after. She didn't just escape the darkness, she learned how to shine without fear. After the courtroom battles, the media frenzy, and Khalid's fall, Layla stood in the quiet of her new life, free but not empty. Freedom wasn't just about leaving Khalid behind. It was about rediscovering herself, piece by piece, dream by dream. She rented a small apartment, nothing like the mansion she once lived in, but this space was different. It was hers. Every corner reflected her choices, every photo on the wall told her story, not Khalid's version, but her truth. With the settlement money she'd won, Layla didn't seek luxury, she sought purpose. She started a small business, one she had dreamed of long before Khalid, a women's advocacy organization that provided legal support and counseling for survivors of abuse. The same kind of help she wished she'd had when she felt alone. Every day, she met women with stories like hers, and for the first time, her scars didn't feel like reminders of pain. They felt like symbols of survival. But personal growth isn't just professional success, it's healing. Layla reached out to the friends Khalid had isolated her from. Some were surprised to hear from her, some had waited, hoping she'd find her way back, and when she did, they welcomed her without judgment, just open arms. She visited her family, standing at the doorstep with both fear and hope in her heart. Her mother hugged her tight. "You were never lost, Layla. You were just finding your way back." And in that moment, Layla realized something profound. She wasn't broken. She was rebuilding. Her mornings were filled with coffee brewed the way she liked, not the way someone else preferred. Her nights were peaceful, not because someone wasn't yelling, but because she had silenced the doubts within herself. She found peace, not in forgetting her past, but in owning it, because survival was never the end of her story. It was just the beginning. Her voice was once silenced by fear. Now, it echoes across the world. Layla's journey didn't end with her freedom. It transformed into a mission. She wasn't just a survivor anymore. She was a force. What began as her personal fight against Khalid grew into a powerful movement for countless women who couldn't speak for themselves. She started small, local community events, support groups, and workshops, sharing her story, not as a tale of victimhood, but as a testament to resilience. Her words carried weight, not because they were polished, but because they were real. "I was trapped, I was broken, but I fought back, and if I can do it, so can you." Her raw honesty caught the attention of human rights organizations, legal activists, and eventually global platforms. She was invited to speak at international conferences on women's rights, standing on stages with lights shining bright, not to spotlight her, but to illuminate the stories of women who had been kept in the dark. Layla's face appeared on magazine covers. Headlines read, "From Survivor to Warrior, Layla's Fight for Women's Rights." But fame was never her goal. Her goal was to be the voice for those still living in silence. She helped change laws, campaigned for stricter regulations against domestic abuse, and created networks of support across countries where women had been invisible for too long. Her story wasn't just a story anymore. It was a spark that ignited a revolution. Women wrote to her from every corner of the world, "You gave me the courage to leave. Because of you, I spoke up. I thought I was alone until I heard your voice." And Layla responded to every letter, every message, because she knew every voice matters. Every story deserves to be heard. She stood tall on stages Khalid never dreamed she'd reach, not as his wife, not as his victim, but as her own hero. Because the most powerful voice in the world isn't the loudest one. It's the one that refuses to be silenced. Sometimes, the strongest version of you is born from the person you were forced to leave behind. Years had passed since Layla walked out of that courtroom, leaving Khalid's shadow behind. But as she sat by her window, the soft glow of the sunset casting warm hues across her home, she wasn't haunted by the past anymore. She reflected on her journey, not with bitterness but with pride. The scars Khalid left weren't signs of weakness. They were reminders of survival. Each one told a story, of battles fought, of silence broken, of a woman who refused to be defined by pain. Layla thought about the girl she used to be, the one who believed love was control, that silence was strength, that survival meant submission. She smiled softly, not out of regret, but with gratitude. "Thank you for being brave enough to endure, even when you didn't know how strong you were." She didn't hate Khalid anymore. He wasn't worth her hate. Hate chains you to the past. Gratitude sets you free. Without him, I wouldn't have known what freedom truly feels like. Layla wasn't proud because she escaped. She was proud because she grew. She rebuilt herself, not as a reflection of who she was before Khalid, but as someone new, stronger, wiser, unbreakable. She looked at the life she had now, friends who felt like family, work that gave her purpose, and most importantly, peace. Not the absence of noise, but the presence of self-love. I am not what happened to me. I am what I chose to become after. And that was the greatest victory of all, not survival, not revenge, but self-discovery. Your voice is your power. Never let anyone take that from you. The screen fades from Layla's reflection to a powerful closing scene, her silhouette walking towards the horizon, bathed in the warm glow of the setting sun. Each step echoes the journey she's walked, not just away from Khalid, but toward herself. Her strides are confident, unapologetic and free. No chains, no shadows, no fear, just the quiet, undeniable strength of a woman who found her voice and used it. Layla's words linger in the air, soft yet powerful. To anyone watching this, if you feel trapped, unheard, invisible, remember, your voice isn't small. It's the loudest thing you own. Speak up, even if it trembles. Stand tall, even if you're shaking. Because the moment you refuse to be silenced, you win. The camera pans out, capturing her figure growing smaller but her message growing louder. Hope, strength, freedom. The final shot fades to black, but her words remain etched in the heart. Your voice is your power. Never let anyone take that from you. If Layla's story moved you, don't forget to like this video to show your support for voices that refuse to be silenced. Comment below. What part of Layla's journey inspired you the most? Share your thoughts. We'd love to hear your story. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of courage, resilience, and transformation. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that your voice is your power. Never let anyone take that from you. Strong.